This is BBC World News. I'm Lucy Hockings. Our top stories. Face-to-face talks to try to end the war in Ukraine resume in Istanbul for the first time in 2 weeks. Turkey's President Erdogan urges both sides to agree an immediate ceasefire.
It will be to the benefit of everybody to achieve a ceasefire and establish peace as soon as possible.
But as the conflict rages on, the Ukrainian military accuses Russia of targeting fuel depots to try to hasten the humanitarian crisis. The talks come as sources close to the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich say he suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning at peace talks earlier this month.
I'm Ben Brown, live in Lviv, here in western Ukraine, where the air raid sirens are just going off again. We'll have the latest on the peace talks and also the very latest on developments on the battlefield.
Our other headlines: British police are to issue the first fines for government parties held in breach of coronavirus restrictions. And Queen Elizabeth hopes to make her first public appearance in 5 months to attend a Thanksgiving service for her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh.
Hello and welcome to BBC News. We're live in Lviv here in western Ukraine, and peace talks have now got underway in Istanbul between Ukrainian and Russian delegations. And the billionaire Roman Abramovich is one of the mediators at those talks in Turkey. That's after reports emerged that he had suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning at a previous round of peace talks on the Ukraine-Belarus border earlier on this month. Well, the truth is that very few people here in Ukraine are particularly optimistic that these negotiations will be successful or bear any fruit, even in terms of coming up with a ceasefire. The view here is that President Putin is not really ready to sue for peace and that he hasn't yet seized enough territory. And although Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky may have made offers on the eve of these talks, such as the future neutrality of his country, those sort of offers are not really enough for Russia, because it is set, that is the view here, it is set on establishing a minimum of a land corridor between Crimea in the south of Ukraine and Donbass in the east. Ukraine fears that Moscow ultimately wants a permanent territorial division of this country between a Russian east and a Ukrainian west, something most people you talk to here say they could never accept. Well, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is hosting those talks in Istanbul, has urged both Russia and Ukraine to end what he called the shared tragedy of this war that's been raging here now for 34 days. And once again, he called for a ceasefire, saying it was time that these talks did yield concrete results.
It's not to the benefit of anyone for the conflict to be prolonged. Every person who died, every building destroyed, every resource thrown into the air or buried in the ground instead of being spent for prosperity is a value that is taken away from our common future. It's up to the parties to stop this tragedy. It will be to the benefit of everybody to achieve a ceasefire and establish peace as soon as possible.
Well, for the latest on the talks in Istanbul that have now got underway, I've been talking to Jenny Hill, who's in Moscow, and Tom Bateman, who's covering the talks in Istanbul itself.
I mean, what's happening in President Erdogan's working office here in Istanbul behind me is that the delegations, after lining up face-to-face across the table, have begun talking. That's within the last hour. Previous to that, the two key presidential advisors to Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Putin had a private meeting one-on-one. Now it's the full talks themselves. But I think, as you hint at, Ben, you know, we've been here before in Turkey. It was only 2.5 weeks ago that a higher level of delegates were in the south of the country, in Antalya, and that was the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers. Now, those talks broke up at the time then after about 90 minutes with no outcome at all. In fact, recriminations really, and a pretty irritable press conference, at least from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister at the time. So I think that's really kept a lid on expectations here, despite the fact that President Erdogan, who's hosting these talks, spoke to the two delegations before they began, to their applause, talked about a historic duty to try and reach some kind of agreement, some kind of deal. He's spoken about a ceasefire to Vladimir Putin. I think that's a lofty expectation that many others simply don't share, at least from this round of talks. And we've had Dmytro Kuleba, the foreign minister, saying in the last couple of hours that he expects and hopes that there can be some address of the humanitarian issues here, but it seems not much more than that.
And I gather the foreign minister you just mentioned there has also been saying that delegates shouldn't eat and drink there at those talks, following the reports that Roman Abramovich may have been poisoned at an earlier round of peace talks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were just hearing from the Ukrainian ambassador to London there, weren't you, about the report yesterday from the Bellingcat investigative website suggesting that Mr. Abramovich and two of the Ukrainian delegates may have suffered the symptoms of poisoning earlier this month after a meeting in Kiev. A fair bit of doubt being cast on all of that by an American official and also to some extent by the Ukrainian president's office. One of the delegates reportedly saying the story was false. But yeah, Mr. Kuleba saying in an interview to the Ukrainian media that anyone negotiating with Russia shouldn't eat or drink anything, shouldn't touch surfaces. He did go on to say, though, that suggests that this was probably some kind of rumour and that everyone at the moment was looking for what he described as a sensational story. So I think a bit of salt being thrown on this from various quarters, but of course Mr. Abramovich is in the room, and that is supporting these claims that he's been quite actively involved in the mediation over the course of the last few weeks. He's with President Erdogan's spokesman, who has been instrumental, in fact, in coordinating some of the contacts between the two sides.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, Tom, for the moment, thank you very much, Tom Bateman, there for us in Istanbul. And let's go to Jenny Hill in Moscow. And Jenny, President Zelensky of Ukraine has said time and time again he wants to talk directly to President Putin. That's the best way to get a peace agreement. But Mr. Putin is not interested in that for the time being, at least.
No, Vladimir Putin has said he's only up for sitting down with President Zelensky once there is effectively something to announce. He wants these talks to continue at a lower level, he said. I should bring you up to date, actually, because a state news agency here has said that the leading Russian negotiator has said that there will be a statement in several hours on those talks. Another agency has been reporting that negotiators have been discussing the possibility of Ukrainian neutrality during their talks this morning. We don't have very much more detail than that, but we know that that sort of idea of neutrality is one area where we might see some sort of constructive development. As you know, one of the Kremlin's demands is that Ukraine should never join NATO. Ukraine has signalled that it might be willing to make some sort of commitment along those lines. So we'll have to wait and see what comes out of those talks. But I think still the question remains open as to how serious the Kremlin is about these negotiations. It's making a lot of demands. It knows many of those demands are still red lines for Ukraine, in particular the demand that those areas of Donbass in eastern Ukraine be recognised as independent, and that Crimea, annexed in 2014 by Russia, should be internationally recognised as Russian. It continues to make those demands, knowing that they are very unlikely to be conceded to. But we'll have to wait and see what comes out of the talks. From the Kremlin, we've had very little other than a signal that they're glad that the talks are continuing in person.
Jenny Hill reporting there from Moscow. Well, we can cross live now to Warsaw and join Hanna Hopko, who is a former Ukrainian member of parliament and also former head of the country's foreign affairs committee. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. What are your expectations about these peace talks in Istanbul? Do you believe they can make a breakthrough?
So actually, more than 160,000 of Ukrainians remain besieged in Mariupol. So for Ukraine, it's crucially important to push Russians to allow green corridors to evacuate people, to provide humanitarian aid. So this is what this negotiation is about for us. And of course, strategically, Ukrainian society, 93% of the population believe that we can win. So only victory is important for us, and victory means restoration of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. We understand the Putin tactics and actually all these war crimes, this genocide. It's just an invitation for negotiation, Ukrainians for some peace talks. But within 9 years of Russian ongoing aggression, we don't believe in Russian hybrid peace and only restoration of our territorial integrity. This is the way to go because they will continue to do what now they are doing in the occupied cities. When they rape women, they torture, they kill kids. So this is, we have to stop, and NATO must act now because this is the terror. And let me also call to the Western leaders finally to recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. You know this information about Wagner Group, that Putin sent a private military entity to Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, and he even at the expense of Africa and Syria, but he wants to continue his violation of international humanitarian law.
Okay, so in terms of the peace, possible outlines of a peace agreement, are you saying that really as long as Russia holds on to the territory it's already got in the east and the south of Ukraine, there can't be a peace agreement because you want the entirety of Ukraine to stay in Ukrainian hands? In other words, there can't be any kind of partition of this country.
Of course not, because now Ukrainians is united as never before, because we know what Putinism or Ruski Mir, Russian world, mean. So actually, we not to be slave. We don't want to be slaves of Putin's empire. So we never again. We don't want to be back in the Russian sphere of influence. This is the civilizational battle. It's not just about Ukraine. Victory of Ukraine, geopolitically important for the whole planet, because another authoritarian regime in Indo-Pacific region just observing and preparing something similar. So this is why the victory of Ukraine is important for our nation. It's important for Moldova, where Russians for more than 30 years have been sponsoring Pridnestrovia, Transnistria. Also for Georgia, for Belarus, where people fighting with the Lukashenko dictator. So it's about freedom, it's about values, it's about true democracy. So it's not just about Ukrainians' resistance and fighting spirit of Ukrainian army. So geopolitically, Ukraine contributing a lot to global democracy survival.
Hannah Hopko there, thank you very much indeed. Former Ukrainian Member of Parliament, thank you for your time. And earlier on, I also spoke to the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom, Vadim Pristaiko, and I asked him about the war, which is now 34 days old.
I understand that Russians now have to come to the table because our military putting up such a fight and our population is resisting Russian aggression. So I do have hopes that this time we will have something out of these negotiations in Turkey.
And what is the hope, though, initially? Just that there is a temporary ceasefire before the delegates get on to talking about a longer-lasting peace?
Yeah, we wanted to have ceasefire. We wanted also to have the humanitarian corridors to be opened, to be able to evacuate our civilians and to bring food and then supplies to some of the besieged cities like Mariupol. Unfortunately, Russians also understand it and use it as their, I believe, their advantage to, to even bend our will, to bend our delegation's will, to show that the weak points and press on them. So we also have to discuss with them how they will get out of our sovereign territory, and how our future system of architecture of our security will be built.
But there is a view, Ambassador, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the programme, that really President Putin isn't ready for a peace deal because he hasn't yet got enough territory. He still wants to secure that whole land corridor between Crimea and Donbass. That is what his minimum aim is, and until he gets that at least, he will not really properly sue for peace.
I agree. This is one of the speculations what we have. We don't know what is in his head. What we also know that recently they started to change a bit their narrative, talking about this. They already sort of finished, they completed the first phase of the special operations, they call it this way, this war. And they mentioned that they will have to secure the Luhansk and Donetsk republics, these runaway pieces, their sort of security. So they are changing, probably because they can't get everything they wanted. They can't get the bigger cities, they can't get Kiev or Kharkiv or even anything in the center of Ukraine.
That's Vadim Prystaiko, the Ukrainian ambassador to London. Just a snapshot of what's going on the battlefield. Certainly around Kyiv, Ukrainian forces are claiming they've had more successes in pushing back Russian troops, claiming that they've retaken Irpin near Kyiv. In the east, though, a lot of Western intelligence analysis is suggesting that the Russians are trying to encircle and trap Ukrainian troops. That is the latest from here in Western Ukraine. I'll hand you back to the studio in London.
Ben, thank you so much. Queen Elizabeth is hoping to attend a Thanksgiving service for her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, who died nearly a year ago, aged 99. The Queen has had mobility problems, and the palace will decide this morning whether she can make her first public appearance in 5 months. Well, let's take you straight to Westminster Abbey. We can join our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph, who is there for us. Daniela, have people been arriving for the service?
Yes, they have. Over the past sort of 45 minutes or so, we have been watching the VIP guests, I suppose, arrive for the service here, which is due to start in the next 15 minutes or so. Of course, the main guest, the Queen, we hope to see her once she has taken her seat inside Westminster Abbey. I think it's unlikely that we will see her arrive here. She is struggling to walk. There are some mobility issues, and I expect that she will arrive probably at a back entrance here at Westminster Abbey, away from the cameras. But we will see shortly. It is, of course, good news that she is able to attend this service, Thanksgiving service, for the life of her husband of 73 years, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. And over the past few minutes, we have seen some of the senior royals, members of the family, arriving here, including some of the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh's great-grandchildren, the first time that we have seen some of them at an event of this kind. The cabinet here, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, a number of other VIP guests, Sir David Attenborough is also here, and it is very much a celebration of the life of Prince Philip after that restricted funeral that he had a year ago at St George's Chapel in Windsor. This is a very different kind of event with many personal touches, much of it planned by the Duke himself.
And the Queen too, Daniela, was she involved in the planning of today's service?
Yes, she was indeed. She has overseen the detail in recent months of what this Thanksgiving service would be. She had, of course, also before his death with the Duke of Edinburgh, planned what they had wanted his funeral to be like. So, for example, today we will see some of the music choices are the personal choices of the Duke of Edinburgh, hymns that he wanted the congregation to sing. There are clergy here offering prayers from all of the main royal estates, Balmoral, Sandringham and Windsor, because the Duke of Edinburgh managed those estates on a day-to-day basis. And also in the flowers, even the flowers inside Westminster Abbey today, they will include sea holly, which is a nod to the Duke of Edinburgh's naval career. So personal touches wherever you look as part of today's service.
And will we also see the first public appearance, or have we already, Daniela, of Prince Andrew?
Yes, we understand that Prince Andrew left Windsor with his mother, the Queen, a short time ago, a little earlier this morning, for the journey here to Westminster Abbey. So I think it is likely that he will arrive here without the cameras seeing him coming into the Abbey. But we will, of course, see him inside as part of the service. We have not seen him in public since the death of his father a year ago in any official capacity. He is here today because this is classed as a family event, a family occasion. It is not a working royal engagement, which he would not be part of.
And yet Prince Harry is not there, Daniela. Why is that?
Yeah, we haven't been given any clear reason why he's not here. His team in California confirmed a few weeks ago that he would not be attending this service. In the background, of course, you have the rumblings over security, a legal case here in the UK that Prince Harry is currently fighting, arguing that he should be provided with security by the Metropolitan Police here in London for the safety of his own family should he come here. That's ongoing, and the mood music is that he didn't feel it was safe enough for him to be here.
The Duke, of course, was related to both Greek and Danish royal family. Daniela, will we see representatives from those families today?
Yeah, they are here and they are inside Westminster Abbey already. Basically, representatives of all the European royal families are here. They actually all arrived at Westminster Abbey in a coach together. They'd obviously all came en masse around half an hour ago, all arrived here. Again, that sort of formal part in terms of the VIP guests here, those European royals. And I think the Thanksgiving service today is much more reflective of the funeral that would have been planned last year if it wasn't for the COVID restrictions. So more than 1,000 people will be inside Westminster Abbey for this event, including more than 500 representing the charities and the patronages supported by the Duke of Edinburgh.
Daniela, we can hear the bells, of course, but we're also seeing live pictures on another camera of the Abbey itself. Explain to us how important a building, a place of worship this is for the Queen and what it's meant to her over the years.
Yeah, it's sort of seen as the royal family's parish church in some ways, the local church of the Queen. So many of the major royal events happen here. We're just watching. You should be able to shortly see some more of the royals arriving, but you can see in the pictures here the Earl of Wessex, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and their two children, Lady Louise and James Viscount Severn, all part of the service today. Shortly outside the Abbey, you should be able to see pictures, we hope, of Charles and Camilla, the Prince of Wales, the Duchess of Cornwall, arriving here for this event. It is a major royal event, and I think you have to remember that with all the COVID restrictions and the lockdowns that we have seen over the past couple of years, we haven't actually witnessed an event on this scale for some considerable time. So it's a really important public thank you for the work of the Duke of Edinburgh. It's an event that combines both a public thank you and a personal goodbye, really, for the royal family. They weren't able to do this last year in the way that they had wanted. They weren't able to give him the send-off that they had wanted when he died in April 2021. This is what they wanted his funeral to look like. There we can see Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, meeting the clergy from Westminster Abbey there alongside the Prince of Wales, arriving here for this service of Thanksgiving. All senior members of the royal family will be here. It is very much a family event and a public thank you.
Given that, Daniela, and the importance of today and the pictures we're seeing now as Prince Charles and Camilla arrive, how would you describe the sort of state of the royal family at the moment? Because we've seen a few PR missteps when it came to the Caribbean tour with Prince William and Catherine. We've had the scandal around Prince Andrew as well. Where are things at?
Yeah, I mean, they've had a really rocky couple of years. There's no question about it. If you look at the situation with Meghan and Harry, them leaving for California, the Oprah Winfrey interview, then you have the situation with Prince Andrew and that civil sexual assault case brought against him in the United States, and then the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. Now, for any family, all of that would be quite a burden and quite a difficult thing to cope with and to manage. And it has been played out publicly for them, of course, because of their status and who they are. And it has made life quite difficult for them in terms of their public profile and how they manage some of those effectively crises for them. This kind of event is a sort of thing that makes people remember the importance of the royal family, I suppose, in British public life. And there haven't been many events of this kind and of this status. And perhaps it's a way of remembering their public work, their service and their duty, which there hasn't been as much of a reminder of in recent years.
And Danielle, of course, the focus will very much be on the Queen as well. Do we know how she is?
I saw her just a couple of months ago, actually, in February, up at Sandringham, the royal estate there. And I have to say, although she's clearly lost weight and she does look quite frail, she did seem in very, very good spirits in terms of her ability to chat and to engage with the people she met. Just to say the pictures here, I'll just interrupt Lucy, the pictures here, we are seeing the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and Princess Charlotte there, and Prince George holding the hand of his father, arriving here for this service of thanksgiving for their great-grandfather, the Duke of Edinburgh. And it's interesting because we have not seen the great-grandchildren of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh out in public very often, and not at an event of this kind at all. So
and
to
Danielle,
see them here
I might not be
in
the
public.
I might not be the first person to have commented on this, but doesn't Princess Charlotte look like her great-grandmother?
Yeah, I mean, there are those photos, people may have seen them, of the Queen at roughly that age and Princess Charlotte now, and there is a striking similarity between them when you see them both next to each other at the same age.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you know, this is quite heartwarming stuff, isn't it? To see the great-grandchildren there with Kate and William, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, attending this really important service for their great-grandfather. And we can see George there, talking to some of the clergy from Westminster Abbey, chatting to them. You know, a big deal for those two young primary school children being inside Westminster Abbey with all of their family for this event.
How careful do William and Catherine continue to be about the privacy of the children, Daniela? How much they're protected from a lot of this? You can see, look, Charlotte there just nestling into her mum there. This is a big deal, you're right, but she's on her best behaviour. You can see her making a real effort there to make conversation.
Yeah, they are. Kate and William are extremely protective of all of their three children, and I think that's why this is, you know, really unusual. We have not seen George and Charlotte really at any kind of major live event ever before. We have had some pictures of them at various events, pre-recorded, you know, with a little bit of notice that we play out later. We've also seen some photographs marking their birthdays or major royal events. Often those photos have been taken by their mother, the Duchess of Cambridge. So to see them at something like this is quite significant. It is really a first outing for them, bar the odd balcony appearance for Trooping the Colour, at a major royal event.
I'm sure we're all wondering, Daniela, where is Louis? And I suppose any parent with three children knows that when you've got two, it's a parent for each child. So perhaps he was a bit too small for the event or for the occasion?
Yeah, I think so. You know, as a mum of three, I can tell you there you wouldn't necessarily want all three with you. And yeah, we had actually been given some advice a little earlier from Buckingham Palace that the great-grandchildren would probably be here, but only the older ones. So like Prince George and Princess Charlotte, but also there we have seen Zara Tindall and Mike Tindall, that's Princess Anne's daughter and her husband. Their daughter Mia is here, and also Peter Phillips, Princess Anne's son, he is here with his two daughters, Isla and Savannah, all great-grandchildren of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, here today to see this service of thanksgiving for their great-granddad.
You've mentioned some of the elements of the service that we can expect to see, celebrating his life and his work as well, Daniela. But when the Queen has referred to him as her strength and stay, do you think we'll also see a reflection on the strength of their marriage?
I think we'll see that based on the number of members of the royal family who are here today, and also in the prayers that we hear from the clergy. We're not expecting to hear anything personal from any individual member of the royal family or from the Queen herself. I think it is a given that we know just how important he was in the Queen's life and what a rock he was for her in terms of how she carried out her public duties in her 70 years, 69, 70 years as Queen. He was absolutely vital to the success of her reign, and she has recognised that on a number of occasions, and it will be why she so desperately wanted to be here today for this Thanksgiving service for his life. But we will hear the clergy talking about the work that the Duke of Edinburgh did, of the importance that he had as a public servant in public life, his sense of adventure, his keen intellect, all of those elements will be mentioned in the prayers and the addresses that we will hear during the course of the service today.
Daniela, given there was no clear precedent, how hard did he have to work to carve out a role for himself, the Duke of Edinburgh?
Incredibly hard, because as you say, there was no formal role for him. No, there wasn't anything like that before, and he had to work out a way that he could have a degree of personal satisfaction while also supporting the Queen in her public work. And he gave a lot up. He gave up his naval career, he gave up perhaps other roles, professional roles he may have taken up, and he chose instead to support his wife in her work as Queen, and that is what he had to do. And it was a sacrifice for him, and that has been accepted by the Duke of Edinburgh. He said that it wasn't necessarily the life he had intended for himself, but he was very happy to do it during the course of the Queen's reign.
Danielle, even growing up in New Zealand, we all did the Duke of Edinburgh. It's something I know he was so incredible.